What family secret do you know that you're not supposed to know? My great-grandparents were high school sweethearts and the only role models I'd ever had for a relationship since my grandparents and parents are divorced and hate each other. Then my mom tells me that my great-grandma had an affair and that's why one of my grandma's sisters isn't like the others. So, there goes that. This is pretty mild, but a part of my mom's side is very, very convinced they're Irish. In all the American, kiss me I'm Irish ways. My grandparents took a trip there. They spent a lot of time at a local pub, getting to know Irish singers and poets. My cousins have very Irish names, etc. 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 I took a few ancestry tests to nail down the rest of my mom's side, not a single % Irish in any of them. The family name, common in Irish Americans, is actually a Swiss surname that got translated at some point, according to the genealogy trace I also had done. My now deceased grandparents want their ashes spread into the Irish Sea and my mom and her siblings are planning a big trip to do it. I'm taking the secret to my grave. The secret ingredient in the white chili is Frank's hot pepper sauce. Would be murdered or worse, disowned for this information. My dad killed a guy and never told us. I found out on Google one day that my uncle committed suicide and that my grandmother committed suicide shortly after due to depression from my uncle's suicide. I found out from a random older friend of the family. None of my cousins knows this happened. My great-grandma told my grandpa that the Jewish girl he liked was taken to a concentration camp when in truth they fled. It is said she knew they were safe. Grandpa meets my grandma shortly after. They get married, but apparently he still talked about the other girl from time to time and that she was the one who got away and how awful it all was. Many years go by, my aunt and dad are born. Grandpa walks around town and meets the girl from back then, is totally shocked and finds out he has been lied to all this time. Grandpa got sick pretty soon after that and died when my dad was only 5 years old. My grandma later once said she believes he died of a broken heart, sad face. My mother had an affair on my father that he doesn't know about way before he had an affair on her that blew up the family. My great-grandmother's famous pecan pie recipe is the one on the Caro bottle. I was gifted it when she died BC. I went to school for baking. I noticed while making it because it's on the bottle. I will tell no one. Maybe I told my sister though haha. When my grandmother died, we found out she was married before my grandfather and had 4 kids. Her and that husband split up and just dumped the kids in an orphanage. Then she remarried later, had my dad and my aunt and just never mentioned the other kids at all. My wife has 11 uncles and aunts. One of this guy's killed himself cutting his veins with a kitchen knife, then he waits to fall asleep while laying on his bed. Years later, during one familiar lunch, one family member confessed to me that this guy sexually abused his granddaughter, 3Y/0 girl. All the family was aware of it, but no one went to the police. The guy was not able to bear the guilt. My dad had a daughter before I was born and never admitted it to anyone in the family. He was basically on his deathbed when he admitted it to me. I was able to track down my half-sister a few years back and we were to meet, but she was very emotional about the whole thing and she backed out at the last minute. I have since left her alone. My great-grandpa isn't related to us. He met my great-grandma when she was a teen. She had been raped by a traveling salesman and was pregnant. Her family kicked her out. Great-grandpa couldn't have kids due to torture in a Japanese prison camp during World War II. He married her and raised my grandma as his own. My great-grandma told me when she had dementia and forgot it was a secret. Great-grandpa is 102 now and is the bedrock of our family. He's not blood but he's our family and he always will be. Edit because people are asking. I asked their daughter, my grandma, after this, and she confirmed that she has known this as true since she was a young adult. My father raped my mother. Possibly repeatedly. I found her diary once, nearly 20 years ago. I was trying to get my father out of my life at the time, as he had always been physically and emotionally abusive, but I had no idea that he was a rapist. She doesn't want to talk about anything to do with him. That my aunt killed herself. My dad lied to us kids and said that his sister ran away and left her child and husband. My dad is also insanely religious and believes that people who commit suicide go to hell. A. That two of my siblings were caught having sex with each other. B. That my cousin's repeated suicide attempts during and college were because she'd been gang raped in her own apartment, and allegedly was arranged by her jealous roommate. C. That my dad had an affair with my babysitter with my mom's permission. My mom seems to think it is my responsibility to be the secret keeper of the family now that my grandmother has died. The secret she doesn't know is that one of my younger brothers lost his virginity to his pre-calc teacher in high school. He was the other man in her affair until he went to college. I have a sister aunt. My mother was repeatedly raped by her father between 9 to 11 and became pregnant at 11 and forced to carry the child to term. Mom was drugged and forced to sign over custody. Anyone who was anonymously adopted in western Pennsylvania around 1960 to 61, we might be related. My ancestors were horrible murderers. When they were finally caught, one was beheaded backwards. The same one also killed his toddler daughter by bashing her head in for crying while they were in hiding. The Harp brothers, if you interested. I have another sibling that is unknown except to me and my father. My great-grandmother had a stepson the same age as her. He was the biological father of one of my great-uncles. My cousins don't know. Always heard my great-uncle knew and had animosity towards my granddad because of it. My great-uncle essentially ran a secret society in my hometown for many years with his friends, and even some of my family members. They would screw over a lot of people and run away with the money they managed to make, and this went on for many years until the government came looking for money that he owed when he took out a loan to build a massive bar and grill. And from there the whole thing came crashing down. To add insult to injury, my grandfather, his brother, was acting mayor at the time and had no knowledge of this, so to say, shit hit the fan would be the understatement of the century. Every single one of my uncles is currently having an affair. My mother was raped by two of her brothers, and a stepfather. Her two other sisters were also sexually assaulted. At one point my at-the-time girlfriend and I were invited into a foursome with my aunt and uncle. This was before I found out about my mother. I've burned bridges with that side of the family, they are dead to me. I was used as a test dummy to see if my uncle was actually a pedophile. I guess they were suspicious. Instead of doing anything responsible, they set me up. I was only a toddler, they figured since I couldn't remember it wouldn't matter. So they had him babysit me for a couple hours and recorded it. I was never supposed to know, but my aunt spilled the beans by accident to me. One of my grandfathers who I always thought I was blood related to is not actually blood related to me at all, as one of his friends he had back when he was alive is actually my blood related grandfather, also passed. That also makes all of the aunt, uncles, and cousins on that side half/quarter blood related instead. It's not necessarily a family secret, but nobody outside of the family really knows it. Heck, most of my relatives that I know on that side don't like to acknowledge it at all. My Welsh great-grandmother had passage booked on the Titanic in 1912. She ended up not going because she fell ill. Turns out it was actually an out-of-wedlock pregnancy that gave her such bad morning sickness, she couldn't go. She lost the baby. She came the following year in 1913 and met my great-grandfather. She only told my mom, who she helped raise during the summers, who then told me. Great-grandma getting knocked up saved an entire branch of our family tree. My cousin doesn't know that her mom is actually her aunt. She's 30 years old. That my mom banged two brothers, one of them is my bio dad, and it's not the one she married. My second cousin was raped by her brother's friend. Their dad told her to not say anything because the boy was a potential professional athlete and they didn't want to ruin his chance to play college ball. Having no solid proof that my niece has to be the daughter of a very famous musical artist very active today. Knowing my sister-in-law is a huge fan of his and that she and my little brother were both cheating on each other during that time. Looking at my niece, she looks exactly like the person I'm talking about. Same eyes, chin, lips, and smile, crooked teeth, same jaw, and hair too. Looks nothing like my brother at all. I'm convinced this person is her father, especially when you put pictures of them side by side. Grandma and Grandpa did love each other and were married but weren't together. Grandma was gay and Grandpa was her best friend. She wanted kids, so they had kids, but she had her love, Auntie Doreen, we called her. Grandpa was free to do whatever he wanted and to our knowledge never had a dedicated partner besides my grandmother. Just the times, glad they could make it work for them, smiley face. There are no secrets in my family, nobody can keep their damn mouth shut. A great aunt on my mom's side supposedly died of an unknown illness at age 25. I found her death certificate that listed ingestion of kerosene as the cause of death. I learned from an older relative that this aunt had discovered she was pregnant and didn't want to be. She was a very vain person and was afraid the pregnancy would ruin her body/looks. She had heard from some idiot that drinking kerosene would cause an abortion. Edit, typo. That my dad smokes. I keep catching him. My mom drunkenly told me that my grandfather, who has passed, always used to sit with his back against a wall in restaurants because when he was in the army in the 50s he was gang raped by other soldiers. He would always make sure his back was covered in public for the rest of his life. My uncle molested my mom when she was a child. She told her sister, my aunt, and she just shut her out of her life. After the Me Too movement, some of my male cousins, two of which are the sons of said uncle, came out as complete assholes, saying anyone who accuses someone of assault years after it happened are lying and just seeking attention. My God, do I have things I want to say to them about their monster of a father? What takes the cake is the whole family has such a holier-than-thou attitude. They have no idea. My maternal grandparents were trying to get pregnant when dating so my great-grandfather would let my grandma marry my grandpa. It worked. My grandparents' anniversary is 7 months before my mom was born. Bad 1940s kids. Smiley face. My mom is an identical twin. Her twin has always looked a bit fresher and less tired than mom. Turns out her twin has secretly been getting Botox for 20 years and let it slip to my sister. She made my sister promise to keep it a secret, she obviously didn't and told me. No one else in the family knows. Well, now I feel boring. My cousin secretly moved in with her fiancé a week before their wedding, so they were livingsinsin, and the family wanted to protect us from their horrific transgressions. I just recently learned that my cousin's father isn't my cousin's father. This was before I was born. My aunt and her first husband weren't able to get pregnant, so she cheated on him and got pregnant. Everyone suspected something when she made the announcement. Anyway, she told her husband that it was his, but it wasn't, and gave birth to my cousin. Eventually they divorced, but to this day my cousin has no idea that his dad isn't his actual dad. And what's even worse is that his dad knows that. And on top of that, my father works with my cousin's real father. I feel bad knowing about this when he doesn't. My uncle catfishes young girls on the internet. Grandpa committed 4 murders and got away with it because he is a lawyer. My mother had 2 abortions by the time that she was 16. Most of the family knew this. And being mostly pro-lifers, they treated her like shit about it. What they didn't know was that she was sexually assaulted by her uncle multiple times, and that he was the father to both of those fetuses. Not really a secret anymore, but I was blown away when I found out that during World War II my great-aunt was the Madam of Dubuque, Iowa. Well, this came out a few years ago for everyone. My aunt had a family years ago, just packed up and left behind a husband and several children. Went on to have a son years later and raised him. He found out when he was in his late 20s, along with the rest of us. All people old enough knew and never discussed it. My paternal grandmother hated my mother. One day she called my mom and asked her to come over and pick up a casserole my grandma had made for us. When she got there, my grandmother had shot herself and left a note saying, among other things, that she wanted my mom to find her that way. She was, shall we say, a fucked up lady and one of the meanest people I've ever known. My mom didn't want people to know because she didn't want that kind of attention. My dad didn't want people to know because he didn't want to give my grandma any level of satisfaction. So, it's just me, them, and maybe one other person who knows. Everyone else thinks she was just an old lady who was depressed about her recently deceased husband. I had an uncle who was a railroad engineer and worked the Terre Haute, Indiana to Danville, Illinois line. Never took a day off from his one day there, one day back route. At his funeral, I was a kid and didn't go. A strange woman came into the funeral home with some older children. No one knew who she was, and finally my grandma introduced herself to the woman and asked who she was. The woman said, "I'm Mrs. So-and-so, I'm here for my husband's funeral." Turns out my uncle had two families, one in Terre Haute and one in Danville. I didn't find out about this until I was an adult. My mom, grandma, aunt and sister kept this a secret for decades. My mom lied about how my dad died. Myself and my brother were told he died to cancer. He wrote us each letters of goodbyes, and I still have mine. When I turned 18, the truth came out. He died in a murder-suicide with his wife, stepmom, her lover, who was also his psychiatrist. Turned out his wife was cheating on him with his doctor, and while my dad had some psychological issues, the doctor purposely prescribed him medication that worsened his paranoia. When he found out about the affair, he shot them both and them himself. My grandma was raised in a Catholic orphanage under the pretext that she lost both her parents and siblings during the Spanish influenza. Turns out her and her dad survived, but her dad didn't want to take care of her, so he left her at an orphanage in Brooklyn and moved to Europe and started a new family. The details of my mother's childhood abuse. I was a very avid reader as a child and would often just pick up